How much are we selling Saudi Arabia, and what are we doing with it? And what did you make of Boris Johnson's statement I saw today, where he was saddened to hear that the weapons we had been selling them seemed to have killed some women and children at a wedding, including the bride at the altar?
Well, yeah, for decades now, Saudi Arabia has been by far the largest buyer of UK arms. In fact, since the bombing of Yemen began in 2015, the UK has licensed over £4.6 billion worth of fighter jets and bombs to the regime. These include the same fighter jets which are flying over Yemen right now. They include the same bombs which are being dropped from the sky. The consequences have been truly devastating. We've seen that in recent days with the bombing of the wedding, but that's not even the first wedding which has been bombed, let alone the first time civilians have been killed. The death toll in Yemen has been catastrophic. We've seen thousands and thousands of people killed as a direct result of bombardment, but many more as a direct result of the humanitarian catastrophe which has been inflicted on Yemen. And for all of that, Boris Johnson has said that he's saddened by the bombardment of the wedding. For all that the government has said that all the MPs are saddened by what's happened, the most useful thing they could do right now would be to end the arms sales and to end the uncritical political and military support they've offered to the brutal regime.
He wasn't just saddened, of course. He welcomed the Saudi investigation of the Saudi bombing of the wedding in Yemen. That would be funny if it weren't tragic, wouldn't it?
Well, it's absurd because the UK has stood in the way trying to block independent investigations into the terrible bombardment which has been unleashed on Yemen for years and years, and yet has supported this absurd situation where Saudi Arabia is investigating itself for war crimes. We're talking about a regime which can't be trusted to run free and fair elections, and yet is being trusted to analyse itself for war crimes and effectively to mark its own homework. And it is an absurd situation. It's an incredibly stupid situation that would be laughable if the results weren't so dire. But even on the terms of the investigation, it's failed, because it was recently announced in the House of Commons that the Ministry of Defence is aware of 320 different potential breaches of international humanitarian law that Saudi forces have carried out in Yemen, and yet only 15% of these have been investigated by the Saudi authorities. So not only should they not be investigating themselves in the first place, they're doing a terrible job of actually doing it now that they are. They aren't even bothering to whitewash their own crimes, if you see where I'm coming from.
I do, and Kat may not have a point of view on this, but if you do, I'd like to hear it. We now have the paradoxical situation that the Saudi Minister of Foreign Affairs today effectively threatened to invade its neighbour, Qatar, and we're selling weapons to both of them. So British weapons are, if that war comes about, British weapons are going to be being used by our best friend against our second best friend.
Well, this was very evident during the DSEI arms fair, which took place in London last year and was attended by delegations from the Saudi military and from the Qatari military. In fact, both regimes aren't just getting weapons from the UK, they're getting the same fighter jets from the UK as well. It's the same companies which would be profiting from both sides if any military conflict was to emerge. Now,
it's a bit like Catch-22. I don't know if you read that, Andrew, when Milo Minderbender rented out his own air force to bomb his own soldiers in order to earn a bit of money from the Germans. It's a kind of win-win, lose-lose, isn't it?
Well, precisely. For the companies who can be making a metaphorical killing out of this, it's a win all round, because if peace broke out tomorrow, then a lot of these companies would be run out of money very quickly. It's threats of war and conflict, which are the bread and butter which keep the arms industry afloat. And when I will see humanitarian catastrophe and tragedy, they see it as a business opportunity.
The standoff seems to be between a group of four, that is Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt against Qatar, and they've produced some accusations against Qatar, some of which could stand up, some of which could be directed against them. But what I don't understand is why this has developed in the way that it has into a feud which has become extremely personal and bitter between the various powers involved, and making it difficult to see how a reconciliation is going to be reached. Nobody outside those 5 or 6, there are 1 or 2 others who are minorly, 5 or 6 countries, believes that this dispute has any substance at all.
It is most odd, and you and I know the accusations of which you speak. Let's superficially, necessarily, given the hour, skate over them. It is undoubtedly true that Qatar supports the Ikhwan Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood, but then you could equally say Saudi Arabia supports people far more extreme than the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes, I think once we start on that, that's a very long and complicated story. But you're quite right. It's true that Qatar does support the Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, that gives a very, very clear reason for Egypt to object, because the Egyptian government of General Sisi has violently replaced a government which was essentially a Muslim Brotherhood government. So you can see where they're coming from. But why everybody else gets so excited about the Muslim Brotherhood, I don't really understand. The Muslim Brotherhood is an organization which has got a mixed record. It's certainly got some violence in its history. It's very, very strongly represented throughout the Muslim world. It's something that it's a fact of life, I would say. And I think it's foolish to imagine that it's just because Qatar supports it that it's a problem.
Yes, and especially on the issue of terrorism. I mean, Turkey, for example, is a Muslim Brotherhood-led country, and that's in NATO and is a Western ally. So the Muslim Brotherhood is not, what's the word I'm looking for, monolithic, neither in any one country, and certainly not between one country and another.
Another example you could take is Tunisia, which is generally regarded as the only Arab country which successfully moved towards a democratic system following the Arab Spring, so-called, of 2011, and yet a great part of the Tunisian leadership is closely associated with Turkey and with the Muslim Brotherhood.
How stable, Excellency, do you think the Saudi regime is? I talked earlier about the gunfire. I have the footage on my phone in the King's Palace just some days ago. And, of course, there must be a lot of pretty angry relatives of the Crown Prince who were, metaphorically speaking, hung upside down until the money fell out of their pockets and billions of pounds were taken from them. Then they were released, but they must be nursing their wrath.
Yes, well, I mean, my slick answer to your question, how stable, is that I worked in Saudi Arabia back in the 1970s, and when we were asked that question then, we used to say the Saudi regime is stable for the foreseeable future, but unfortunately the foreseeable future is only about 18 months. That's still an answer of sorts. But Saudi Arabia has changed radically in the last 3-4 years, because it used to be a country where absolutely nothing happened, and now it's a country where things are happening all the time. And so it's a very, very different story, and nobody really knows the answer to your question.
There's a lot riding on it, though, isn't there?
A huge amount. Yes, I agree. On the whole, if you want my personal opinion, I think Saudi Arabia will survive, but I could easily be wrong.
Well, we've all been wrong before, Oliver. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.